Oh, thank you, Walter Jebby, for playing that guitar for me. You're a good friend. Hi, I'm Teresa Norton. Welcome to The View from Abroad. I'm the Broad. This is the podcast that each week takes a look back at one of the columns I wrote for a Hong Kong newspaper sometime between 1993 and 2000. And I wrote on all kinds of crazy things. I wrote on parenting. I wrote on flirting. I wrote on irritating advertisements and national identity. I think it's worth taking a look back and examining them to see how our views have changed and why they've changed. So each week I start off by reading one of the columns, and then I interview a guest to discuss how and if our opinions and beliefs have changed or not changed over time and why that may be. And my guest this week is Dana Spade, who after 13 years as a writer for radio and television, attended law school in Colorado, and she recently retired after 28 years of prosecuting litigation and a decade on the bench. Before we talk to Dana, we're going to kick off with the newspaper column published in the South China Morning Post around 1995.
Dancing Queen Without a King. I don't know. Maybe my husband's nuts. But he's convinced that the twist is the only dance that you can do to anything. He demonstrates his theory to me in the living room to whatever MTV has on offer, and in the shower to anything from the overture to Candide to Frank Zappa's Nanook Rubs It, with wild abandon, I might add. But he never, ever shares his twist with me in public. What happens to men when you marry them? That young buck who used to swing me around the disco until the inseam of my pantyhose was down to my kneecaps looked at me like I'd suggested he pluck his eyebrows when I asked him to dance in public the other night. And we were at a ball. A ball! In the olden days, that's what people did at balls. They danced till dawn, or at least until midnight, if I remember my fairy tales correctly. And it wasn't like I was sitting there with the only dud. Every person at my table with cleavage was bouncing it in unison in the direction of their husbands, and not one of those guys wanted to know. Now, there were men on the dance floor, but when I waltzed by one of them on my way through the riot of black velvet and crimson taffeta gowns to powder my nose, I noted that the dancing boys all seemed to be either under the age of consent or over the age of capability. I think my husband is now caught in between those two ages and has been tossed into a limbo, no pun intended, where it is uncool to dance. Oh, I managed to drag him reluctantly onto the parquet floor for one slow dance, but I'm here to tell you that as soon as that band leader lowered his baton, Chubby Checkers was twisting his way back to the table like his life depended on it. No applauding and waiting to see if the next tune was going to be a toe tapper. He had paid his debt to high society. I'm going to get really politically incorrect here, not to mention make a gross generalization, and say that what this Cinderella needs at the ball isn't a prince. It's the prince's gay cousin. When I think of the nights of sweaty ecstasy my girlfriends and I used to experience on the dance floors of gay bars in San Francisco and Honolulu with great-looking guys in skin-tight jeans who were not even remotely interested in what was inside our Calvin Kleins, well, it makes a girl homesick. I had a very dear friend here in Hong Kong who was, without question, the best dancer with whom I have ever had the pleasure of cutting a rug. Job was incredibly fit and looked to be in his late 40s, but I suspect I'm about a decade off, erring on the side of youth. I will never forget one evening about 10 years ago when he whisked me onto the dance floor of a bar in Lang Kwai Fong and magically transformed me into Ginger Rogers. He was one of those terrific dancers who made you feel like you're the terrific dancer, and I'm not. Girls, you know the type. A firm hand in the small of your back, dry palm clasping your moist one, spins you out and reels you in without dislocating your shoulder. He could dip you without making you feel like one. And then, when the last strain of the last chord of the song had faded, and only then, Job would applaud you, as if you had been out there teaching him the ropes. What a man. The other night I suggested to my husband that it might be fun to take a class in ballroom dancing. He suggested it might be fun to have my head read. So we go to a ball or two a year, and by the end of the evening I find myself one of many women out there shaking our groove thangs together to cool in the gang and Donna Summer while our menfolk roll their eyes heavenward. I wonder if they're watching the soles of Job's loafers as he dips some lucky angel over a cloud.
Dana Spade, I am so happy to have you here with me on The View from a Broad.
Ms. Teresa Norton, it has been so many years. It is a wonder to be with you today.
We can trace our friendship back to a small radio television station in Agana, Guam. And that was actually like 43 years ago. It was a
Oh, don't remind
long
me
time
how
ago.
old I am, my dear.
And not long after that, we were roommates when I was hosting a rather manic and madcap radio show in Honolulu, and you were working at a local television station. And, here we are. And listening to that column. And I got to say, first off, right out of the chute here, the very good sport who was then my husband and often featured as a subject in quite a few of these columns is no longer my spouse, but we have remained good friends and co-parents together. So that's one thing that is not current for me. Let's see. I guess the bit that I questioned today is whether or not it was okay for us to go to places like Hamburger Mary's in San Francisco and Disco in Hong Kong. And I can't remember where we used to go in Honolulu, but back in that time, the music was so good and it was such fun. And we'd turn up often with our gay friends. And I don't know, would that be considered bad form today? What do you think?
It's so hard to tell. And back in Honolulu, the hangouts were Hamburger Mary's in Waikiki and the Marrakesh. Do you remember the Marrakesh?
Yes.
Where everyone went to be seen.
It was very much the place to
However,
be.
our celebrity du jour was always Tom Selleck would come waltzing in and take up too much room on the dance floor. And we used to say he's just a very attractive man, but he takes up too much room on the dance floor.
Well,
But
I'll tell you something. I thought I should reach out and do a little dipstick poll. So I reached out to a very good friend of mine who, as he describes himself, is a gay man who is gently in his 60s. And I said to him, was that appropriate or not? Or would it be appropriate today or not? And this is what he had to say. He said, I think that's a good classic question. My theory is that this is indeed age-related and perhaps city or country related. Where and when gay places were rare and more dangerous, I think there was a sense of, hey, we gay men don't have much choice where we can go, so how's about some segregation? But I remember that came more from older gay guys, not my contemporaries so much. Then, as younger people became more relaxed about the whole topic, there was more mixing, less fuss. Today, the gay places are disappearing because the fuss has almost gone for young people. Everywhere, anytime is cruising space because of the internet. And Brighton, gay capital of Britain, has fewer and fewer fully gay bars. Even the Queen's Head, which had Freddie Mercury as its pub sign, no longer promotes itself as gay. I do think a whole hen night of straight women makes for a bit of an intrusion to a gay bar or nightclub, but on the individual level, anything goes, and the dance floor is yours. So there we have a little weigh-in from somebody from the gay community who's our age.
And what I find fascinating, I think this is a COVID-19, post-COVID-19 phenomenon. I don't see a lot of dance clubs anymore, gay or straight.
Mm.
And so often when I was on the bench, my support staff would be younger than I, and I and the other judges would talk to them, and the number of things that have changed were slightly mind-boggling to me.
Mm.
But at some point we said, "So where do you guys dance?" And they looked at us like, "Well, on TikTok?" And so what we are
Oh my
doing now
gosh.
is the equivalent of the dance club. There was a very famous, slightly sketchy dance club here in Denver. It was torn down years ago, before COVID-19. And my
Wow.
heart goes out to these young people in terms of how do you meet the, oh, insanely gorgeous, good dancer? Yeah, how do you meet
Ginger
Job?
Rogers of your life.
And how do you find out if they're gay, straight, or whatever, gender fluid? Well, apparently now people are doing TikToks.
Right. Well, you
And
know what? Let me just interject this. My son and his girlfriend were just out in Portugal, and we went to a club here that does all sort of retro music. And I was sitting there bouncing around on my chair. And my son looked across because he and I love to dance. And he said, "Ma, do you want to dance?" I said, "Yeah." We were the first people up on the dance floor. By the time we left, everybody was dancing. But, that is a very sad notion that there aren't dance clubs anymore. That was why that's why I went. I had friends say to me the other night, "Well, is the reason that because I was talking about this column and our podcast coming up, and he said, "Is the reason that you went because you felt safe there?" And I kind of said, "Yeah, I guess." I think about it now. I said, "No, I went because it was more fun there. The music
and
was better."
I don't think we actually ever talked about safety or non-safety, which these days seems to be a very pressing concern for people.
Yeah.
Um, and it was just a way to have a good time, meet some wonderful people. It it seemed that every time we went, something surprising and delightfully insane would happen. I think about the
Absolutely.
night the drunken gentleman came staggering up to our table. We're surrounded by gay men, and one of them whips out a wedding ring and hands it to me and says, "We're married." And I was like, "Okay." And then he put his arm around me and looked at this drunken man and said, "Are you making the moves on my wife?" And drunken man, I mean, again, very attractive gay men who are glaring at him, staggers off to go find someone else to talk to. But
Well,
weird,
that's, I think, what you're talking about there. What you've identified there, I think, is what this guy was talking about in terms of safety. Was it like if you went to a gay club, you didn't have to worry about being hit on, right? That was I think that was his point. But,
sure.
I'll tell you, being on that dance floor with Job was unforgettable. It was wonderful. It was that whole thing of having somebody who really knew how to dance. I'm sure that if he was offered, because Job was older than I was at the time, and he had a very funny thing. He was kind of like, I don't know if he had a little bit of narcolepsy or what was the thing, but he would be standing at the bar in this gay bar in disco with a cocktail, and he'd have his eyes closed, and you'd think he was asleep. And a certain song would come in, and his eyes would open, and he'd just sweep you out onto the dance floor like without missing a beat. And I have to say that, this idea of actually learning how to dance is something that I do. I know they do this on, like, they have these television shows that are competitions where stars dance with, professional dancers and all that. But did you and your husband ever consider having any kind of dance lessons together?
Actually, my current husband, like you, I was not I was married and then I was not married, but then I substantially upgraded to the current model. And at one point I was going, "My darling Daniel, what if we took like tango lessons?" And the response was very similar. "Really? I think you should have your head examined, my darling girl." As I told you, his idea of dancing is rock'em sock'em robots.
Well, listen, I used to work with a particular company that had me coaching their entire sort of middle range to top level management team. And at one point, the owner of the company said to me, I think you should have an alumni association. And I said, really? This was in Hong Kong, and it was a Hong Kong Chinese company. I said, really? And he said, yeah. He said, as people come through your coaching, then they can join this. I said, what do you want me to do? He said, take them out and give them experiences that they would not have otherwise. So I took these mostly fellows. I mean, I think there were 2 women in the group. It was mostly men. And it was a construction business. So these guys learned ikebana. I had connected everything to art. They'd learned singing and choral singing in harmony, but they also learned swing dancing.
Fun.
And it was a wonderful thing because it's about leading and following. And to be a good leader, you got to pay attention to what your partner is capable of doing, when they're getting in trouble, helping them to feel confident that they can do well. And if you're really a great leader, then you know what Job knew. And that is, at the end of the day, you allow them to be the one in the spotlight, right?
What's so fascinating to me is the way I met my darling Daniel was in an Aikido class.
Oh,
And so I meet this gentleman. He actually checked me in. I thought, what a nice guy. And suddenly he turns up on the Aikido mat. And we've talked over the years about how much Aikido is like dancing because it is not an offensive martial art. You can't walk up and Aikido somebody. But if somebody is coming at you with less than honorable intentions, then you use their own momentum and get to a point where you can at least go, clearly I have offended you. Can we talk about this? And so when you practice, it's not to crush the other person or put them down. We've talked about you're dancing with a partner. You have a
yeah.
partner, not an enemy. And if they become your enemy, then they don't want to dance with you anymore, do they?
Right, right, right. Isn't that interesting? So that's how you 2 met. So it was on a different kind of a dance floor, really.
It was. And that's why it's so fascinating to me that Mr. Rock'em Sock'em Robots did not want to at least consider learning some dancing. I mean, here in the heart of Colorado, let's do some square dancing or do something. Let's do some line dancing.
Alaman left. Listen, we're going to take a break. And then when we come back, I'm going to my ears will be perked and my eyes will be peeled to hear and see what it was in that column that sparked a memory of yours that you can share with us. Okay, Miss Dana Spade, ex-roomie of mine. It's so fun having you here with me. And tell me, please, what is the story that comes up for you as a result of having listened to that kooky story about me and Joe on the dance floor?
I guess part of it is thinking back to the good old days of Honolulu and the gay clubs, which apparently no longer exist, and just socializing so much more. And I find myself thinking, oh, my heart goes out to so many young people whose idea of socializing is connecting on the internet. And people no longer go to the office to work. People don't seem to go to concerts anymore. They log on Netflix or they pay a fee to see it on, I don't know, Hulu or Paramount or whatever have you. And so it seems like such a lonely society these days where we were out there. And again, we didn't think about safety. We didn't think about, are people looking at us going, those two young ladies seem like they're a little bit tipsy and a little bit
Having a
out of
little too
control.
much fun.
And
Well,
so
yeah, yeah. I mean, listen, you worked in the courts for the better part of your life. What do you see how this plays out in any way in terms of people's
I
criminal
find
behavior?
it fascinating when people would come to court and just simple things, manners, the way they dress, where I'm sitting there and I'm trying not to be judgmental, but when you wear a t-shirt to court that says shit happens or a giant marijuana leaf on your shirt,
You clearly
you
were
know,
not speaking with your counsel before you came.
having a jury pool and suddenly a man in the jury box stands up and starts to walk off and it's like, "Excuse me, sir, where do you think you're going?" "Well, I have to use the loo." Can you let us all know because there are rules associated with this and you don't just get up and walk out of the room
Yes, you couldn't do that because he may be getting up and walking out of the room to tell somebody something.
or to just walk away never to be seen again, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
And
yeah. I mean, so do you associate some of this with a lack of sociability and social etiquette that is part and parcel of being around a lot of people? And well, I know that's sort of what the Confucian values. I spent 40 years in Hong Kong. That's what those values kind of stemmed from, was to keep the peace, because rude behavior pisses people off and we have problems, right?
and you know, what I'm seeing is kind of getting back to the dance scenario. Recently, the darling Daniel and I joined some friends at a jazz concert here in Denver. It was outdoors and there's like a band shell and the band's playing and again, all the women are bopping along and the men are being delightfully oblivious going, "I don't see anything. I don't see her," hopping and bopping there. But eventually one couple got up and much like your experience and another couple gets up and I found it fascinating. They were all people of our era, shall we say, who were dancing and twirling, and the young people were kind of sitting and looking. There was a group next to us on a blanket, and they were just kind of looking and laughing and pointing. And I could be completely full of beans here, but I felt like they really wanted to do it. They just didn't know how to go about starting.
Well, it may have to do, as Alan said about the gay club scene, may have to do with where you are, because I went to I saw Shaka Khan. I saw
Oh, yeah.
Shaka Khan, yeah, at in Cascais at the jazz festival there. And young people were dancing and moving the whole time. So maybe it has to do with where you are, you know? And certainly I appreciate, not to be a huge downer right now, but I appreciate how, if you're living in the United States, being in a big arena full of a bunch of people, and listen, it's not just the United States, it's
Right.
just that we have um, a greater incidence of that stuff happening there. Um, I wonder to what extent that plays in the back of your mind when you're in with a big group of people. I used to think, where are the exits? Just because if there was a fire or something, I would want to know how to get out. But the whole idea of being at a concert and having to think at all about whether or not you might be a target, that's a whole nother story.
And living here in Colorado, we are the home of Columbine. We
Ugh.
are the home of the Aurora Theater shooting. I drove past the theaters on my way to the courthouse the morning after it happened, and I spoke to the chief of police about a week after it happened, and it was just heartbreaking. There was not a person in the city of Aurora who was not personally affected by that shooting. This is the home of the gay nightclub shooting in Colorado Springs. And we wonder, is it that all the crazy people seem to want to find Colorado? But yes, it is something that occasionally my husband and I talk about in terms of, is it safe to go to the random Target or to a movie theater?
Right. And to think that at the beginning of this conversation that we had, I mentioned that this friend at a dinner party the other night said, did you go to the gay clubs because it felt safer? In other words, that as a woman on your own, if you didn't want to get hit on or whatever, to be in a space with gay men felt safer. And now this conversation has gone
In a very different direction.
And still all to do with being in a space with a lot of people and finding how can you feel safe.
In a sense, I feel fortunate to have lived in a time of gay clubs and madcap roommates where we would just come home and go, oh, and let's go out tonight and let's get all the makeup we have and see if we can put every speck of it on our faces right now.
Do you have any more spandex I could borrow?
And leg warmers and
yes, it was, it does feel like it was kind of, in a way, the age of innocence. And so from a very lighthearted column to something a little bit more serious, but I think that's good. I think it's okay. We have to understand that even out of happy memories and lighthearted anecdotes, there are real things that people are dealing with. And if you're feeling overwhelmed or you're feeling like it's not safe for you somewhere, I hope that you have people that you can talk to and that you have a community of friends and loved ones around you that you can speak to these things about. Because, isolation is certainly, to me, I would say that is absolutely not the answer.
yes, I find myself thinking about your interactions with Sam and Rachel, and I think it's almost an individual responsibility now to create safe places for those we love to dance and sing and be madcap, because the impulses are still there. We as human beings want to reach out to one another. We want to have fun. And so I think as mums and aunties and just friends down the street, to try and create safe social places, physically safe and emotionally safe, to be a little bit madcap and wild, and to think about that. And whether it's a dinner party or a dance party or a Halloween party or whatever have you,
Yeah.
to try and reach out to others.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to end it. Thank you for that, Dana. That's wonderful. Listen, thank you for being here with me today. This has been terrific. It's so lovely
Thank
to see
you.
you. And I want to thank everybody who's tuned in today. Thank you so much for being with us. And, remember, breathe all the time, come up slowly. And as my dear friend Geraldine used to say to me when I would be worried about what was going to happen next, hey, and what if it's good?